If there's one thing that the medieval church cared about when it came to astronomy, it was the usefulness of astronomy in the setting of the calendar, especially when it came to the date of Easter. For centuries, the church had relied on the Julian calendar, but after generations of use, its minor imperfections compounded, and the calculated date of the solstice fell more than a week later than the actual solstice. The culprit was an estimation of the length of a year that was just a little too long. Thus, in the late medieval period, the church sought to reform the calendar. But to do so, it would need to finally understand how long a year was. To explore how they attempted to do this, I've come to Italy, and in this video, we'll be exploring how astronomers in the service of the church attempted to do this using an unlikely set of observatories, churches themselves. So, join me as we uncover this holy astronomical quest in the time of astronomy before the telescope.
In modern civilization, we've gotten so good at setting our calendars that we often forget that they're inherently astronomical in nature. While our modern calendar is based solely on the annual motion of the sun, many ancient calendars were also, or even solely, based on the cycles of the moon. A remnant of this fact can be seen in the method used by the church to determine the date of Easter. The Bible relates the crucifixion of Jesus to the Jewish Passover feast, which meant that early Christians had to look to the Jewish calendar to know when to celebrate Easter. However, the Jewish calendar is a combination of a lunar calendar and a solar one. A lunisolar calendar is a tough combination. To explain using modern figures, the length of a year is 365.2422 days. The lunar cycle is 29.5306 days. This means that if you started counting the lunar month at the same moment as the beginning of a year, you could fit 12 full lunar cycles in. However, you'd have 10.875 days left over. Let's round that off to 11 for simplicity. This means that if you set your calendar solely by the moon, each lunar year your calendar would drift with relation to the seasons, and it stacks up quickly. The first year, it would be off by 11 days, the second year, 22, then by 33. However, at this point, you've exceeded the length of a lunar cycle and can simply add an extra lunar month to your year, referred to as an intercalary month, to bring things back into better alignment. It's not perfect, but by inserting that extra month whenever enough days piled up to warrant it, things could be kept in rough alignment. This process worked well enough for the Jews, who, at the time, were reasonably concentrated geographically. Thus, when the priestly class in charge of the calendar declared the need for an extra month, the information could be disseminated quickly enough for their liking. While the early Christians had little choice beyond listening to the Jewish rabbis for the date of Passover, frustration quickly grew. The wild swings in relation to the solar cycles that the Jewish system allowed was intolerable to the Christians, in no small part due to anti-Semitism. In 325 CE, the First Council of Nicaea decided that the proper date for Easter should be the first Sunday following the first full moon after the spring equinox. This meant having an excellent understanding of both the solar and lunar cycles. Unfortunately, early Christians didn't have this deep understanding. Instead, they made use of a shortcut of sorts, known as the Metonic cycle. This cycle is named after Meton of Athens. He noticed that every 19 solar years, the lunar cycle seemed to repeat. In other words, if you had a full moon on January 1st in one year, 19 years later, you would have another full moon on that date. If this relationship held, then Christian calendarists could figure out one cycle and then simply repeat it in perpetuity and not have to worry about things in the future. By the year 1000, simply tracking which year in this 19-year cycle it was the standard practice. The oldest surviving text doing so was by Abbo of Fleury. Starting around 1162, the year in the cycle began to be referred to as the Golden Number by one Master William. This was popularized by Alexander de Villede in his poem on calendrical computations, Massa Compoti, around 1200. But while this relationship was good, it wasn't perfect. It was actually off by 2 hours, 4 minutes, and 58 seconds per year. Add that up over the full 19-year cycle, and you actually end up about a day off. Fortunately, that's an easy fix. Simply subtract a day from one of the lunar months, somewhere in there, to bring things back into much better alignment. This practice, known as a salutus lunae, became the general practice. Although mathematically sound, in practice, it was a little less simple. There was no agreement on when in the 19-year cycle this should be done, leading to confusion. And other problems soon cropped up. The Romans had also tinkered with a relationship between a solar and a lunar cycle and come up with an 84-year cycle. While the Council of Nicaea had rejected this, some parts of Christendom, specifically the British and Irish Christians, adopted it, which allowed their chosen dates for Easter to disagree with the ones being used elsewhere. This prompted the Synod of Whitby in 664, which forced these groups to fall in line. And to illustrate how grave a sin celebrating Easter on the wrong date was, the Archbishop Theodore of Tarsus excommunicated the lot for being trained incorrectly. While the Roman 84-year cycle was firmly rejected, their methods did introduce an innovation that would stick around. Specifically, they introduced the practice of listing the age of the moon, the number of days past the new phase, at the beginning of each year. This became known as the epact number and also served to make the calculations easier. These calculations became extraordinarily important to the Church. As one pseudonymous author wrote, "Deprive our time of computus, and blind ignorance will seize everything." Pacio of Basel indicated that those who could not perform computus were not worthy of being called priests. However, the success of this system would become its downfall. While the system of using the Metonic cycle minus one saltus lunae per cycle was good, it wasn't good enough, and by the time of Charlemagne, in the 8th century, there was a discrepancy of 3 to 4 days between the predicted date of the equinox and the observed one. Similarly, the phases of the moon were coming roughly 1.5 days earlier than calculated. Charlemagne turned to his tutor, Alcuin of York, but Alcuin could offer no suggestions. While priests had mastered the ability to use the golden numbers and epochs to calculate, the underlying reason had been forgotten. Thus, for centuries, Christian calendarists were forced to continue performing calculations that they knew to be in error because no one knew what to do about it. The problems continued to compound, and in 1276, a missed timing of the lunar cycle and equinox came together such that Easter was scheduled a full month off of the correct date. By that time, Ptolemaic astronomy had started working its way back into Christian Europe. As it did, Johann de Sacrobosco noted that the inaccuracy of the Metonic cycles had been well known to Ptolemy. Indeed, in the first chapter of Book 3 of the Almagest, Ptolemy states that one day needed to be subtracted every 300 years. This would bring the length of the year to 365.2466 days, which is a marginal improvement towards the correct value of 365.2422 days. It still wouldn't have solved the issue being faced, but it would have delayed it. Regardless, this discovery got Christians thinking more about the actual length of the year, and they began seeking other experts on the matter. Albatani had recommended dropping 1 day per 100 years, resulting in a year of 365.24 days. Roger Bacon attempted to measure the length of the year himself and decided on dropping 1 day per 125 years for a year of 365.2425 days. The options began to multiply, leaving the church with decision paralysis. Councils were called to try to resolve this. At the Council of Constance in 1415, Cardinal Pierre de Ailly recommended 1 day per 134 years, for a year of 365.2425 days. At the Council of Basel in 1434, Nicholas of Cusa suggested 1 day per 150 years, 365.2433 days per year. By this time, the problem had gotten so bad that Easter was celebrated 5 weeks late in 1424. Despite all the opinions and all the councils, no one felt empowered to make any actual decisions. Everyone, quite rightly, felt that making such decisions was above their pay grade. Thus, any decision would need to come from the Pope. Unfortunately, by this time, the Church was facing other crises. It was facing schisms, anti-popes, and uprisings. They would have to continue kicking the can down the road while the calendar fell ever more into disarray. It wasn't until the early 16th century that a pope finally sought to do something about the calendrical discrepancies. Pope Leo X, as well as the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, wrote to universities asking for their faculty to offer their opinions, which would be discussed at the Lateran Council scheduled for 1511. But by the time they did this, even more complications had been introduced. Earlier, I gave the lunar period as 29.5306 days. This is correct, but it's an average. Due to the fact that the moon speeds up and slows down in its orbit, the period is somewhat irregular. Calendarists had previously swept this under the rug, aiming to use the average I just cited, although they didn't fully know the correct value. But by the 16th century, astronomers were getting good enough with the Ptolemaic astronomy that some felt the Church should adopt a system that considered the actual lunar phases. This was proposed by Regiomontanus and backed by astronomers from Vienna, largely because most of them had been taught by Regiomontanus. However, this was quickly rejected, with convenience and tradition being given as the reason. In 1545, the Council of Trent authorized Pope Paul III to reform the calendar, but he died in 1549, before any significant progress could be made. Another Council of Trent in 1563 tried again to push the matter and appealed directly to Pope Pius V. Pius was unable to fully resolve the issue, but did issue a new breviary, a prayer book, in 1568, which set the golden numbers back by 3. This brought the cycles back into alignment, effectively hitting the reset button. But given time, the problem would occur again. However, this little bit of motion signaled that there was an appetite to address the problem, and Luigi Giglio, a physician from southern Italy, submitted a plan for calendrical reform. This was delivered to Pope Gregory XIII, who promptly made Cardinal Guglielmo Sorletto the head of yet another commission to study the matter. This commission brought together many of the brightest minds in astronomy, including Luigi's brother, Antonio Giglio, Christopher Clavius, and Ignazio Danti. The commission issued a printed summary of its plan entitled Compendium Novae Rationis Restituendi Calendrum, Compendium of a New Method for Restoration of the Calendar, in 1577. But before concluding the story of the reform of the calendar, I'd like to pause to explore one of these reformers, Ignazio Danti, who left an interesting legacy of instruments scattered across Italy. Ignazio was born in 1536 to Giulio Danti, and his family was no stranger to scholarship. His grandfather, Pier Vincenzo Rinaldi, composed a translation of Johann de Sacrobosco's De Sphera, while an outbreak of plague in the 1490s forced him to retreat to a remote villa. While there, he observed the stars to keep his mind occupied, writing, Undoubtedly, the long physical indisposition I have suffered for so many years would have put me under the ground if my mind, continually sweetened by the contemplation of astronomy, had not attenuated the weakness of my body. Of his two children, Teodora and Giulio, Pier Vincenzo noted that his daughter, Teodora, Ignazio's aunt, showed the greatest aptitude for astronomy. She reportedly mastered Sacrobosco's De Sfera, but also learned to use an astrolabe as well as the use of astronomical almanacs. She was also the author of a commentary on Euclid's Elements. As a child, Ignazio was not only taught astronomy, but painting and architecture as well. Ignazio joined the Dominican order in 1555. In 1562, he requested a transfer to the monastery of San Marco in Florence. While there, he began tutoring the children of wealthy families in mathematics and in the sciences. This brought him to the attention of Cosimo Medici I, the Duke of Tuscany, who appreciated Ignazio's blend of skills and hired him to create maps. But since Ignazio had Cosimo's ear, he took the opportunity to propose some audacious projects. One was an ambitious project to build a canal across Tuscany to connect Florence to both the Mediterranean and the Adriatic. This obviously never materialized, but his second proposal, to attempt to accurately measure the length of the year, was much more practical. To do so, Ignazio was given permission to install 3 instruments at the Basilica of Santa Maria Novella, all of which remain to this day. Unlike most medieval churches, which have their front facing west, this one had its entrance facing south, the direction of the sun at noon, which was important for Ignazio's purposes. Ignazio stated that this building was ideal because it was the most convenient and stable in Florence, being strong enough to stand immobile as long as the world lasts, and being freely exposed to the south so as to receive the rays of the sun at the times of the equinoxes from morning until evening. The first instrument lies towards the west side of the building's facade and is an armillary sphere. This instrument features an upright ring which is in the plane of the meridian, aligned north to south. A second ring is aligned with the plane of the celestial equator, which is to say it's tilted to match the latitude of Florence. On the equinoxes, the shadow on the sunward side of this ring should fall directly on the rear side. Ignazio described an observation taken on the spring equinox of 1574, during which he invited many gentlemen to come as witness. And at that instant of the equinox, and a little before and after, the center of the sun was in the equinoctial. The sun's rays appeared as a subtle thread on the edges of the concave part of the equatorial armillary, above and below, and then, in an instant, the southern thread vanished, and the northern began to grow. He describes this as happening at 10:24 a.m. on March 11th. However, this was off by approximately 2.5 hours due to a minor misalignment. Likely, this was an error in the position of the ring of the celestial equator, as this needs to be tilted from the vertical by the same amount as the observer's latitude. Ignazio believed Florence to be at a latitude of 43.66 degrees north, but a more correct value is 43.77 degrees. Despite this, it allowed Ignazio to correctly identify the date of the equinox. A second instrument is also on the southern facade, but to the east. This instrument is a marble quadrant 1.5 meters in radius. To use this instrument, Ignazio recorded the extremes of the shadow at the 2 solstices. Their difference should be the obliquity of the ecliptic, the angle between the sun's path and the celestial equator. For their difference, Ignazio found a value of 46 degrees 53 minutes 39 seconds, giving an obliquity of the ecliptic of 23 degrees 26 minutes and 49 seconds. This is not particularly good. Since the obliquity of the ecliptic changes slightly over time, I used the formula from the 2010 Astronomical Almanac and found that the value of the obliquity of the ecliptic in Ignazio's time was 23 degrees 29 minutes and 37 seconds, indicating that Ignazio was off by about 3 minutes of arc. There's also a third instrument, but to see it, we'll need to head inside. In the floor of this church, there is a long brass line set into the floor which runs for 47.6 meters. A second, shorter line lies just to the side of it. They may not look like much, but these lines are the scale for an instrument built into the church itself, an instrument meant to capture the position of the sun throughout the year. A church is the ideal location for this sort of instrument because of their solid construction combined with spacious and dark interiors. Above the entry to this building is a large circular window. Around this window, Ignazio placed 2 small holes to allow them to act as camera obscura, projecting images of the sun's disk onto the floor. One hole is just to the right of the window when viewed from outside. The second is directly above it. During the summer, when the sun is higher in the sky, the image is closer to the door. In the winter, it retreats towards the dais. The longer line extends far enough to capture the sun's image at solar noon throughout the entire year, but most notably at the 2 solstices. The second, shorter line only has a circle to denote when the sun is at the equinox. Using that information, Ignazio hoped to be able to compare the date of the observed solstices and equinoxes to the same phenomena in ancient records. They could then determine the exact number of days between the observations, divide by the number of years, and calculate with great precision the length of a year. Ignazio's plan was simple and elegant. But when Cosimo died in 1574, his brother Francesco took the role of Duke of Tuscany, but had little love for Ignazio or astronomy. Scarcely had Ignazio had the opportunity to use his new instruments before he was sent to Bologna to the convent of San Domenico. Although this transfer effectively exiled Ignazio from court life, there were some comforts. The convent had an extensive library, and more spiritually, was the resting place of the founder of the Dominican order. During his time in Bologna, Ignazio attempted to recreate his instrument from Santa Maria Novella. He began by creating a new meridian line in the chamber of the Inquisition. However, the hole for sunlight was only 4 meters high, giving a much shorter and therefore less precise line along which to measure. He then turned to the Basilica of San Petronio. But to make the necessary modifications, Ignazio would need permission from the building's custodians, a team of 5 fabricieri. However, the head of this team, Giovanni Pepoli, was rather self-important. He gave Ignazio permission without consulting the other 4. This sort of behavior wasn't out of character for Pepoli, and it was eventually what got him killed. Years later, when a thief was cornered on Pepoli's property, Pepoli refused to hand him over to the town legate. The legate referred the matter to Pope Sixtus V, who didn't suffer any nonsense. He pronounced that Pepoli could suffer the same sentence as the thief: death. Regardless, Ignazio was able to use the church to install another meridian line. But there was a major problem. No matter where the hole was placed, the pillars which supported the nave would block the sun during some seasons. Ignazio did the best he could, but the meridian line was off by more than 9 degrees from a true north-south alignment, making it virtually useless. Because of this, Ignazio's line was replaced in 1655 by Giovanni Cassini, and that line remains to this day.
Although Ignazio's plans for the meridian line didn't work out as well as he'd hoped, his expertise did land him a position at the University of Bologna as the second chair of mathematics. Officially appointed on the 28th of November, 1576, Ignazio was the afternoon chair, as he was only required to lecture in the afternoon. He was quite a popular teacher and reportedly drew 70 to 80 students. when jealous rivals suggested that his association with the Dominican order should require him to work at exclusively Dominican colleges, the university, desperate to keep their popular lecturer, convinced no less than 3 cardinals and the Pope to insist that he stay at the university. But this also brought him to the attention of the Pope, and in 1581, he found himself summoned to Rome by Gregory XIII.
In Rome, Ignazio was given 2 primary responsibilities. The first was reminiscent of his first work with Cosimo, the production of maps. Many of the maps he created are still visible in the Vatican's Gallery of Maps. But his second responsibility was to provide advice on calendrical reform. And again, Ignazio set about creating a meridian instrument. This time, it was in the Torre dei Venti, the Tower of Winds, in the Vatican. This tower is immediately above the Gallery of Maps, but is not accessible to the public. The meridian line here only covered the entry of the sun into Cancer in the summer, and went through Scorpio and Pisces, as the room was not long enough to complete the meridian line. According to legend, Ignazio used this meridian to demonstrate to Gregory that the equinox was occurring on March 11, 10 days prior to the expected date, which is what convinced Gregory to adopt calendrical reform. But, as we've already seen, by the time Ignazio was summoned to Rome, Gregory had already been convinced to pursue the matter. Returning to the question of the calendar, the main problem that Ignazio had attempted to solve was the correct value for the length of a year. Ultimately, it appears that none of Ignazio's meridian lines produced observations leading to a refined value for the length of the year. Instead, the primary values under consideration were taken from the Alphonsine tables, Copernicus, and Erasmus Reinhold's Prutenic tables. These values were all in extremely good agreement to 1/3600th of a day. They all agreed on the length of the year being 365 days, 5 hours, 49 minutes, and 16 seconds, plus or minus 1 second. Putting that in decimal form and carrying it out to 4 decimal places, they all agree on the length of the year being 365.2425 days. That's still slightly high, but only by about 26 seconds per year. Thus, it would take over 3,000 years for that error to compound into a full calendar day. The council certainly wasn't aware of this minor discrepancy, and the agreement was close enough that they were able to move forward. They began with the traditional Julian calendar rules. A year would have 365 days, except every 4th year, which would add a day. That brings the average length of the year to 365.25 days, which is a bit high. To bring it down, they skipped the leap day every 100th year, placing that skipped leap year as the first year of each century. This subtracted 1/100th of a day, bringing the average length to 365.24 days, which is a bit low. Thus, if the century in question was a multiple of 4, i.e. divisible by 400, then it reverts back to being a leap year, adding 1/400th of a day, and bringing the average to exactly 365.2425 days as intended. This is still the system we use to this day. This left the question of what to do with the calendar being already 10 days out of line with the solstices. The decision was ultimately reached to simply skip 10 days in the calendar. Thus, in 1582, October 5th was followed by October 15th. This date was chosen to skip as few saints' days as possible.
By the time Pope Gregory XIII implemented the calendar reform in 1582, the Church's centuries-long struggle had finally borne fruit. The Gregorian calendar didn't come from a single flash of insight or lone genius, but from generations of scholars who sought to understand the heavens with ever greater precision. Figures like Ignazio Danti, Christopher Clavius, and countless unnamed computists weren't just chasing numbers, they were trying to ensure that sacred time itself aligned with the motions of the cosmos. The result was a calendar so precise that it remains our global standard today, drifting by only a single day every 3,000 years. And fittingly, it stands as both a scientific and spiritual monument, born in an age when observing the heavens was seen as a way of understanding divine order. So the next time you glance at your calendar, remember, every date on it carries the legacy of medieval monks, Renaissance astronomers, and church walls that once doubled as observatories, silent witnesses to humanity's long quest to measure both the year and eternity.